Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. We are going to be going through the book of Judges again. We're doing the story of Jephthah, finishing it off where we were last. Yeah. Let me just hopefully we'll get some people in here in a minute. Gonna post. Sandy, I'm sure you're out there somewhere, Sandy. Yeah. So hopefully we'll be having a conversation soon. Otherwise, it's just me talking about Judges. Which, I mean, if that's your thing, you just want to hear me talk about this book on my own, seem like a crazy person, particularly with this section that we're talking about. We'll see. I did not hear word from Jason, so he's a maybe, I'd say. Okay, do we have anyone willing to show up? I'm going to send this link to Jason just in case. We might have a Yosef out there somewhere, maybe, or perhaps even a Cassandra. We'll see who shows up. I'm excited to talk about this section. We really need Jason because this is the least defensible part of Jephthah's story. Bring up the Bible. Okay. I'm going to share now the Bible. Oh, okay. Sorry, Sandy. I thought I posted it. There we go. This is why. Hopefully we will have a show now. Sandy will be joining us. Friend of the show, Sandy. Sandy, I have a special surprise specifically for you. So if you can show up, that would be excellent. There we are. Adding to the stage, Sandy. Hi, Sandy. How are you?
Hi, I'm closing YouTube. I hope only YouTube. What is it doing?
If you go away for a minute, I'll wait for you to come back. Don't worry about that.
Hey. Oh my goodness. No, that's the link wasn't the only reason. I'm just running back up from Milton. Got my son for a few days, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're discussing the fact he's making tea and was there enough water in the kettle, so.
That's funny because that means you probably drove past me.
Well.
Yeah, I'm Halton Hills area.
Okay, yeah. If you're not right down in Georgetown, I probably did. I have a few friends who are Georgetown people who aren't actually over that far.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, Sandy. So before we get into Judges, we're going to be doing Judges 11. But before we do, I'm going to teach you how to play the kazoo. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Because last week
I
you
haven't
made
had
mention
one of
that you
those.
don't know how to play the kazoo. And this amazed me.
I
So
think I
all
had
you
one in grade
do,
2.
what?
I might have had one in grade 2.
Yeah, it is the easiest thing in the world to play because all you do, mouth. That's it.
I
You just
didn't
have to
know they
know
were
which side.
still available. Like, really? You can still get them?
I mean, at like a dollar store or something like that, they still sell
Okay,
these for sure.
cool.
And you just all you do is like a you just make the noise and you just hum. You basically just sing with this in your mouth. That's all you do. That's all you do. And
Very
whatever
nice.
you do, it just does.
It does.
That's it. It's like a dollar.
I'll have to look for one.
And you said you can sing, right?
Oh yeah, I sing.
You sang since you were 1, I think you said in the last video.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, look, Sandy, you know how to play the kazoo.
Okay.
You just put something. I was at an open mic thing, and there were people all playing music at the same time, and some of it was songs I didn't know. And if they start playing songs you don't know, then you just hum along. You figure out the tune, and you're just making your noise while everything else is happening.
I bring that to Guitar Circle next week.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, seriously, that is the perfect time to have a kazoo. Is they're singing songs and you're like, I've never heard this song before, so I can help out with the chorus. But during the other sections, you just hum along with the kazoo.
The guy with the harps might have a little bit to say.
There's someone with harps? Oh, or do you mean the harmonica?
Yes.
Okay. For a moment, Sandy, I pictured that quite literally.
I think I know one person. Well, I used to know one person who played harp, but I don't at the moment.
My wife's old boss played the harp, of all things.
Yeah. Let's see, we've got guitars, ukulele, banjo. Not often, but I have seen a banjo. Is it ukulele? Mandolin. Mm-hmm. Lots of just vocal singers. What else shows up?
Those are all great.
Played a lot of hand drums. One guy had not just a drum bass, but like a beatbox and stuff. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can beatbox. I learned how to do it at some point.
Nice.
I don't know. Yeah. Growing up on the rough streets of Windsor. I say that, but in reality, I did spend a lot of time in Detroit. So.
Okay, that makes I was trying to picture the rough streets of Windsor.
The rough streets of Windsor.
Okay.
Born and raised in South Detroit.
Yep.
Because there is no South Detroit. South of Detroit is Windsor, Ontario, people.
Yep.
So, yeah. That's where I'm from. All right. We're getting into got that Bible up. We're going to talk Jephthah's tragic vow. Sandy, will you read this section?
Yep.
Awesome.
Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel-Keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Let's check. You'll note, see, this is why it's important to read the footnotes, okay? Or read Hebrew, as I'm sure all of our Jewish listeners are right now screaming at the screen. But reading your footnotes is very important, because then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be Hashem's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. The word whatever, let's click on that. Ooh, or whoever,
Yeah.
and offer up, or offer him up for a burnt offering. So it's kind of like in the vow itself, there's kind of a bit of what did you expect was going to happen?
So it's an odd thing to say to begin with. Are they in a phase where some of the Israelites were actually like running with idols and things where they might actually offer a burnt offering, or is he literally expecting this to be within the context of the Hebrew religion? Because that's a very strange thing to say if so.
Well, and this is one of the things that I've said repeatedly. This is one of the drums I beat over and over again, is the realization that these names for other gods are names that were applied to Hashem at different points, right? So in Jewish prayers, you say, "Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe,
Yep.
Melech Olam."
Yep.
Melech has the same letters as Moloch, the god that people sacrificed their children to. Moloch and Melech are the same, but one
consonantal structure.
That's right. That's right. And so what they were referring to, and I was using this as an example yesterday on the stream, is in Maltese, the word for God, that's where my dad's from. The Maltese word for God is Allah. And Egyptian Christians call God Allah, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you said the people who worshiped Allah, you would be, generally speaking, you'd be talking about Muslims. But then there would be certain places where those things would overlap.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just that they take on other forms of worship, it's that they mix them, right? And one of the ways of taking it is, you shall have no other God beside me. Like, you have God and then right next to it. And we've actually seen this. We've seen altars where this is for Hashem, and then right next we also have an Asherah pole, just to cover our bases, right? Or if you know people who are very new agey, you'll go into their house and this will be for God, and then there's also a Buddha, and then there's also, right, you have all of them next to each other. And so they might be worshiping God, but it gets mixed. And then some of the people will practice things where, I don't know, they heard about this somewhere. So they're non-religious and they do the sign of the cross if something evil happens. Or, you know what I mean? Is like, to what extent is Jephthah blending or understanding these things? It's a very good question. At the beginning of the book, though, we already have this idea that they're beginning to mix and intermarry with the people of the land. Okay, that those traditions are kicking around. So it seems like it's part of his vow. I think that if you're just reading Genesis, I think it's implied that Abraham believed in human sacrifice from the word go. And that part of the binding of Isaac is actually God revealing, this is not what I'm like. I am not like this.
Right. So this is part of God's I am statement in a way.
Right.
By what is
this
it?
This is who I am. Yeah.
Saying places I've seen in Judaism Judaism, where they'll talk about it's not just what you know about God that shows you God, but it's the what God is not that also reveals. It's the, it's not just list qualities that are not him. And you can see also from that what he is. Fill in the negative spaces.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find there. Yeah, it feels to me, especially because we know what Jephthah is. Jephthah does not have he doesn't have what is the term within evangelical Christianity if you're struggling and you have someone that talks to you about these things? What am I thinking of?
Spiritual director, a mentor, or a
No,
advisor.
it's a specific term when two evangelicals, particularly guys, if you're like struggling with thank you, Laura, accountability partner, right? Jephthah does not have good accountability partners.
No.
Right? And when you mix in certain groups, let me tell you, like serving with the homeless in downtown Toronto, I knew people and they served and they were trying to help people in downtown Toronto. And some of these people, they they came from a more privileged position. They came from money. Some of them came from like Oakville, places with money. And they came to downtown Toronto to serve the homeless. And some of them, they began to understand the homeless more and more. And some of them crossed lines. They entered into relationships with people who were on the streets. They had their own addictions. I knew someone who took time off, stopped working, and just hitchhiked, doing crack and all that business, right? Like the Jephthah is an unstable figure.
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
He is a deeply unstable figure. And every now and then, like, let me tell you, like, I knew people who they were sleeping around and stuff like that, and they thanked God for the person that they were sleeping around with. Right?
Yeah.
They prayed that God would give them to, like, let them have this person sexually. And they thanked God when it happened. Right? These are people, in Laura's words, without good accountability partners. Yeah. Well, and this has kind of come up within this little corner, the idea that we actually, cognition is done in community. Right? When you understand things in a community of people, you don't understand things on your own.
Distributed cognition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's exactly right. It's like if Jacob wanted to lie to all of us about what Hebrew means, he could do it because, I know some Hebrew, but not enough that I would feel entirely confident correcting him unless it was some low-hanging fruit. And I think it would be the same thing for you, right? Like,
I know way less than that even.
That's right. But there are things that he does not understand, that he is relying on other people to do for him. But when you're talking about the community that Jephthah has, there are people that would encourage him to do bad things, right? And what's the expression? You are as good as, like, you're the average of your friends. You pick the 5 people you spend the most time with, and you just consider yourself to be in the middle of them. I'm a little bit worse than this guy. I'm a little bit better than this guy. But then when you look at that average, is that a good average? Is that a bad average?
I don't know what mine is. I have some weird friends.
Can I tell you the part that I actually find the most difficult to deal with in this section?
Sure.
Right here. The spirit of Hashem was upon Jephthah.
Yeah.
Made a vow to Hashem. it will be Yahweh's, or sorry, Hashem's, and Hashem gave them into his hand. It positions repeatedly God as part of the movement of the narrative.
Mhm.
So there is question: is this the binding of Isaac all over again?
It's interesting.
Now people will tell you just Google it.
Just Google it.
Yeah, just Google it. That's Cassandra is bringing up this point. It's true, which is also interesting because there were sources like Snopes.com where you needed. Do you know what Snopes.com is?
I do.
Okay. Well, Snopes.com became ideologically possessed, and so the corrections required corrections. It's like, what do you do when the metaphor? Well, what do you do when salt has lost its saltiness? What is it good for? What do you do when a sponge is mildewy? You have to throw it at, right? It's good for nothing. I think about that because a sponge is one of those items that you use to clean everything, but then it is one of the first things to go bad.
Interesting. So are you saying you think, see, this is interesting.
I love when you make statements like, now this is interesting, because what this means to me is when I was teaching you how to play the kazoo, you did not care at all.
No.
That wasn't interesting. This is interesting.
It is interesting. Excuse me one
Yeah.
second. What's happening? Is it hot?
While Sandy is doing this, I'm going to teach everyone some sign language, okay? Everyone, this is important to learn. Okay? You do this action and then this action. Sandy,
What are you teaching?
What is this in sign language?
That is.
I think I got it right because you're laughing.
It's sign language.
That is the word. That is the words sign language in sign language.
2 words though. 2.
Yes, 2 words.
2 words.
Sign language.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of my favorites. Board.
You can say sign language in one. I don't know if I'd say word, but whatever the. For some reason, I thought it was like meme, but not in the context they use it online. But you can say, so you can say sign language. You can also say this, like your hands, as in expressive. It's expressing yourself.
Yeah.
Also known as communicating.
Yeah. Okay, Sandy, you said now this is interesting when we were talking about.
I did.
And now you've completely forgotten.
No, I haven't completely I never forget. Not okay. That. I forget a lot of things, but no, you were talking about your watching Jacob talk to himself. You were talking about your 2 analogies. One was somebody who is sleeping around, and the other was.
I was talking about a sponge. When a sponge gets dirty, the idea of just Google it. When you have things like Google, right. Like all these things, our sources of news have been captured. So now, how do you get news? You can't understand if the sources of news.
Snopes.
Yeah, if Snopes, if Google, if these are.
Well, how do you know if this is polluted or not?
Well, one of the ways that you know is when you see these people say, "This is our perspective, and we are trying to push it."
Oh, I meant the verses. Like, how do you? I meant what we just read.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. Like, I'm divorced, right? But I've mentioned I lost my partner a couple of years ago.
Right. Okay.
So I was with somebody after I got divorced. We never got a piece of paper. I don't
Right,
consider
right.
myself as having slept around. And I did pray, God, why can I not have a relationship like Ruth and Boaz? Now, I was not specifically saying it couldn't be the man I first married. It just, he wasn't seeming to hear that prayer.
Yeah. Well, I
And
wonder.
so I'm kind
Okay.
of like, because I know where I am with all of this.
Yeah. I
But at the
was.
same time,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
the
I
dynamic.
wanna ask you a question about something because I have a theory and I have not put it out into the world. So again,
Oh no,
accountability partners.
a theory.
Yeah, yeah. I have a theory, which is um in the Bible, there isn't just relationships that are sexual that are husband and wife. They
No,
acknowledge extramarital relationships and they acknowledge that there was such a thing as a concubine.
right.
And I think the relationships that we call partners are pretty much identical to how biblical time understood concubines. People would live together. They might have some shared amount of their lives. They might even have children with these people. But there was even among people acknowledged these relationships, but they didn't share the common honor in society. Like people wouldn't view it as nothing to for that person to be someone's concubine, but they wouldn't see it the
That's
same
right.
as their
Anything.
wife. But this is so interesting because concubines go away because Christianity takes over.
Really?
Yeah, Christianity gets rid of the idea of concubines because of passages in the New Testament that speak specifically of the leaders in the church being a one woman man. So, because of this, it becomes more and more idealized to be a one woman man. And so it becomes more and more marriage as what people want. And so that goes away. And as Christianity is fading away, common law takes over and the notion of a partner and the language that we use and the way we speak of it, even in just like common conversation, is the way that concubines were spoken of in the ancient world.
I will defer on your question on the theory to some of the wise Jewish people that we know,
Mhm.
because there have been instances of multiple wives within Christianity. And because I've
Yeah.
actually seen conversations around that recently and not just from like theoretically long ago.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain that the theory is.
I think what you are saying is people who are Nigerian. Is that what you were saying?
No, I know people who are Nigerian
Yeah.
and
There you
who
go.
also, yeah, like that, where the
Yeah.
question is now coming around again to what is the appropriate handling of a situation where, um, because you're discussing other reasons, you might cut people off from a community of fellowship within a church. How does it relate to whether you will or will not cut other people off who are coming into Christianity from other places, and how does
Right.
that function? Things
Right.
like that.
Right. Well,
Mhm.
in in Canada, in Ontario, there are Muslims that have multiple wives. I know I work with someone who has multiple wives. It's just only one of them is legal.
And
The other
that's
one,
a conversation that's coming up in Christianity, which means moving into a Canadian context, you're inadvertently creating concubines within faith religions.
right, right, right. And if the question is if this man converts, if someone converts to Christianity or converts in general, we don't consider their marriages to no longer be legitimate.
Sorry, I'm kind of
I
inadvertently having
understand.
two conversations at one time.
I understand. I
Here,
understand.
this is David. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's talking about the funeral flowers that are still here.
Still alive? Or are they
No.
plastic?
No, they've just finished. Yeah, they're old. We'll put them in the garbage. Yes. We'll get some new ones for Easter. Yeah. Not that I'm celebrating Easter, but
yeah.
Oh, so
are you celebrating Easter
or not? We might go over to. I got to talk to Jacob if he wants to go over to the little church on Sunday, but I try to tell them I'm not doing communion and stuff like that. So I hang out with people that are in church. I'm still exploring the whole Noahide thing.
Okay.
Well,
Sandy, maybe you and I should have a conversation about this after we have a conversation about.
Let's talk about Judges and another.
Let's talk about Judges.
Various things in life.
There's too many rabbit trails that are available right now. Did I just accuse you of being a concubine for a period of time? Perhaps.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, so now we can talk about.
But it was within the context of a friendship. So
what does communion mean? And why are we celebrating Easter or not?
Wonderful.
And dead funeral flowers.
Yes. Yeah, I understand. Okay. So we know, though, have you heard the passage where God talks about child sacrifice?
The passage? They're like, I can't think of a specific one where there's as in not several places or where it comes up or not. So
I believe, I think it's Isaiah. I have to find this verse where God basically says, not only did I not command you, it wouldn't even cross my mind to request such a thing. Where God puts it in terms like it's almost surprising to him that we would perform child sacrifice. Where he's just like, you think that I asked you to do this? Not only did I not ask, it didn't even occur to me. It was almost like a kind of creativity that we would think to sacrifice our children, which I love as a response from the Almighty. He knows all things. Could not see that one coming. It was just so evil.
Have you found it?
No. Okay,
because I was going to say something called, what does it say? It's called the Jewish Agency references Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, and Deuteronomy 18. But I'm thinking let's say God says no. Let's just say Isaiah. You think there's one in Isaiah?
Yeah, I think it's in Isaiah.
30:27-33.
I don't know. Give it a read. Let me hear.
Okay, hang on a tick. Let's not go into biblical hermeneutics. Let's find an actual. Will it give it to me? Let's see. Well, hopefully it makes a reference. We're in Stack Exchange. What I really should do is be in Safari or somewhere. Let's try this. Let's just do this.
I should have found this beforehand. I am so sorry, everyone.
Isaiah.
How about everyone just trusts me? Huh? How about that?
What? As in, we're not really intending to read this. We're just going to reference it.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, yeah, I would like to move on. Everyone should trust me that, as it was said in The Simpsons, where does it say that? I don't know. Somewhere in the back. When speaking of doesn't it say this in the Bible? I don't know. Somewhere in the back somewhere. Okay. So yeah, the difficulty is Hashem is empowering to some extent, Jephthah. Sandy, will you continue to read this section? Yes. And it is set up as though it sounds like it's setting up for child sacrifice. It sounds like this is the only possible option. Let's be honest, people.
Okay. And then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah. And behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble for me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. Now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites." So she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions." And so he said, "Go." Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year.
Okay. Your reaction, Sandy, to this section?
It's sad.
Yeah. It is sad.
Every time I read it, I can feel like tears just kind of at the back of, I'm like, we're not crying about this again.
Yeah. And it's set up as though, like, what other option was there going to be? She was his only daughter, right? And Jason was kind of saying this before, which is why I wish he was here, because he mentioned something that's very, very smart. You have the grandchild of a prostitute is a virgin sacrificed, right? Because grandma is a prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
And so that seems like it's very symbolic. Like, what is the fruit of the fruit is that it goes nowhere. It stops. It becomes dead, right? It feels like these ideas of people who commit to specific things, and then it is at the cost of their dearest, of like you were successful. Like, for a lot of pastors, it requires them to become workaholics, and they do an okay job leading a church, but then their family falls apart. There's a destruction that's all around them where you should have. Yeah.
Okay, so in what context? In what context is it playing this out? So at the beginning, in the first section, you talked about how God is part and parcel of the whole thing.
Yes, and they put this on. You open your mouth to Hashem. I cannot take back my vow. She said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to Hashem. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. Now that Hashem has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites."
Right.
She tells him to do what you swore to. And this, oh man, like, there is an amount of shame. Like, a way of thinking about it is the text expands, slows down. Okay. So a situation where it slows down is when you are reading The Binding of Isaac. It's slow, it's tedious. They have conversation while they're going up, where you get, I mean, even the character realization. Father, here is the wood and the fire. Where is the animal for the offering? Right? Like, there's this. And so it takes its dear sweet time. This section of scripture is ashamed of what it's talking about, or it is purposely obtuse. My father, you have opened your mouth to Hashem. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. According to what has gone out of your mouth. It's not saying the details. It's saying do that thing, right? A way of thinking about it is euphemisms, right? They went and they did that thing that people do in the bedroom, right? That's a euphemism. That is, there's some amount of distance that I'm putting with the action. Whereas with this, it's, and at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made.
Right. I'd really have to think about this for a while, because so clarify for me. So you are saying sometimes, in some instances, there's a euphemism. You say something under your breath. You don't state it. But this is not that?
No, I'm saying that this is that.
Okay.
Like, so as a, I do a lot of theater. I think I've mentioned this before. As a director, I will tell people what words mean. In this context, this is a euphemism for, and then whatever is happening. And the most common euphemisms are things for things that we're embarrassed about. So if I take a break right now and use the bathroom, do you think I'm taking a shower if I say that?
No.
Right. And it would be very awkward if I said, Sandy, we have to take a break because I have to go pee out of my penis. Right. You'd just be like, why did you say, just use even the most basic euphemism, please. That's very awkward. Excuse me, I must defecate out of my anus. Give me a moment, right? You'd be like, what? Why? Please just say, I have to use the restroom. Do you think I'm taking a nap in there? That I'm taking a rest?
You do realize you're making me think sign language, right?
Oh, what is the euphemism for using the bathroom?
Oh,
What does it literally translate to? Do you literally say bathroom, restroom?
There's no euphemism. You would say toilet.
So you just say toilet. Yeah, well, that's interesting too. I'm going to use the toilet. What do you mean by use? You mean
no, you don't say I'm going to use the toilet. You would just say toilet.
You just say toilet.
You would just indicate that you're going to or looking for, or you know.
Right. That's interesting. Well, and we talked about that before too.
With little kids, you are very,
yeah. Sign language is very upfront. Yeah, and so in the Bible, the way that you would say using the bathroom would be to turn aside or to cover your feet. Literally, when Saul goes into the cave, he said because what you would do is
because the skirts of your robe suddenly cover your feet.
Yeah, you pull up your robe, you put it in front of you so that your butt is out, so all of your robe is in front of you. You're squatting, so it covers your feet.
You're not a girl. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Well, Cassandra is saying it using the restroom. It absolutely. The thing is that the euphemisms become so common that sometimes they are, sometimes when the Bible uses euphemism, it doesn't mean anything. To know your wife, it's not, oh, this means he understood her to her absolute depths. It's like, no, in some of these situations, it is just saying they slept together. Sometimes it is speaking of sex in a more romantic sense using the term no, but sometimes it is just a euphemism.
Could just be old-fashioned, say they were getting a little familiar with each other.
Well, even that, see, that's the euphemisms are so interesting. But this is important to know when you're reading biblical literature, because when you're reading biblical literature, sometimes you have a story that takes no time whatsoever, and sometimes the story slows down. This comment that people like Pajot and Peterson have talked about how there's an indefinite amount of details.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you can go on and on. I was helping my friend edit his novel, which I has just finished and is about to be published.
Um,
And I'm so happy and excited about that.
I
But
thought you were gonna say, so happy I'm done with it.
no, I'm
I'm
not done
about
with
to
it.
look
I
for
started
a
recording
poetry
the
edit,
audiobook,
so
so
I've got a couple of names, so I'm about to get a poetry book edited.
yeah,
Yeah,
cool, very cool.
it probably use a
But
few more euphemisms than it, well, or maybe has a few more. Well, whatever.
but one of the things that you do as a writer is, and as an editor in particular, because I was editing, was just going the first round. We would give recommendations to him of things to change, me and some of the closest friends.
Yeah,
Everyone else fell out except for me by the end. And
yeah,
we were sharing a Google Doc, and it was just like, well, maybe you want to consider this, maybe you want to consider that. He wasn't removing anything. And then I said to him, all right, Mike, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to make a copy of your document.
yeah.
I am going to start editing it the way that I would edit it. And if you don't know what I cut, it's cut. And for the first chapter, I cut half of the words. And he read it and said, I don't know what you got rid of. I cannot even fathom that this was twice as long.
Yeah.
And it was like, and then the next chapter, I cut 5 pages out of 20 pages. And he's like, where did you get rid of this? Right. So you cut and it speeds up. And then when you're trying to, a way of thinking about it is like when you're watching a movie, there's actually a comedic scene of this that was cut from, yes, during our conversation about the Bible, we're going to talk about scenes cut from the original Austin Powers. Okay, so in the original Austin Powers, there's a guy who gets run over by something. He gets run over by like a steamroller. He dies, okay? And then for whatever reason, they had this whole scene where it's like, it's like a James Bond ripoff, right? So it's a spy action scene. This guy dies, but then for no reason, it just like stops. And the HR department calls the man's wife to tell him he was injured on the job. And like it shows like scenes from the funeral or whatever. And it's just like, it's like the humor is, what if we actually for no reason showed this indefinite amount of details? You don't, and I mean, there's a couple of Norm Macdonald jokes that are this way, where there's like a series of jokes where instead of getting to the punchline and trimming all the fat, you take your dear sweet time, sometimes called the shaggy dog story, right?
Oh, I didn't know what that phrase meant.
Yeah, and you're meandering, you're going here and there, and it's just like, could you please? It's a complaint that when someone is really bad at stories, is you're just like, can you please stop and just get to what you're getting at?
What, people don't just go like this? Like like a little faster.
Yeah. I had an ex-girlfriend who had this incredible ability to tell a story in such a way that it seemed like there was going to be 2 more sentences to the story. And so every story she told, people looked at her like this. Right? Because like you laugh at the end of a good story, oftentimes, especially if it's a good funny story, people laugh at the end. But they were waiting, like how to land it so that people know that they're supposed to laugh. She would end it in such a way that people felt there were 2 more sentences. So she would ask me to tell stories that I wasn't present for. She'd be like, tell them that story of what happened to me when I was 6. Because she didn't know how to end.
Well,
But that is the mastery of amount of details where we're going. I'm sorry. We are, speaking of meandering, shaggy. We are quite shaggy. We are quite shaggy dogs ourselves right now. Okay.
mm-hmm.
Some people have said, does he actually sacrifice her? Maybe she just lives essentially as a nun, right? So in ancient Greece, there were some punishments where you got the death penalty or you lived in exile. And those things were considered equivalent. Does that make sense? Oh, did I lose you, Sandy? I think I may have lost Sandy. Okay, so there were some traditions where the punishment, I believe this actually, was this the case for Socrates? May have been. The punishment is death, or you have to leave. You are a wanderer for the rest of your life. And you're just wandering, and it was the same to them. And there isn't really a strong tradition of celibacy within Judaism. Sandy has returned in glory.
I'm on my phone. Apparently, my computer cord was unplugged at the other end.
That will happen. Okay.
Yes. Will there be more to read? If so, I'm going to get the computer back up and running.
I can do the reading if you want. So it might be that she just lives as essentially celibate, as a nun for the rest of her life. And that to some ancient people, that would have been equivalent to death. That would have been considered so incredibly radical. Like as an example, if you talk to Jacob, one of his rejections of Jesus is the idea, if he's supposed to be this incredibly righteous man, where are his kids? Right?
Right.
Yeah, Cassandra is saying this, no heirs equals death. Yeah, these things are lined up. How do you see the descendants of someone who dies young or who lives a life unable to do that? Like even some of the blessings for someone who's considered a eunuch in the Old Testament, which clearly is what's happening with the Ethiopian eunuch in the New Testament, is this idea of like the person who has no future, right? It is a kind to not be able to have children is to not continue on. Yeah.
And as a man who has not been able to marry or to have children, you can still have an occupation and support yourself and do things. But I would think like especially in biblical times, the woman, her support is her family, her children. She's left with, does she have any other relatives?
Well, and this
or does
the meaning of when it says honor your father and mother, that your life will be long in the land, literally what it's talking about, it is the word honor is interpreted, this is known as the Korban law, is literally taking care of them in their old age. In ancient Israel, there was no social security. There were children. That's why children are a blessing from the Lord, because when you get old, there's no nurse that takes care of you. There is one of your children. And the more children you have, the more people are likely to take care of you.
Right.
And within some communities that were not Christian, that were not Jewish, you reach a certain age, and the good thing to do when you're 72 is to jump off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the nicest thing you could do for your family, because they did not see this. So if you do this, your children will do this. That's why your life will be long in the land. It's not, oh, God will bless you so that you'll be the kind of person that doesn't get a tumor when they're 52. That's not what this is about. That your life will be long in the land is your life being long in the land is you have people taking care of you later on. Someone making it to a certain age at like, especially in worlds based on physical ability, yeah, that's dependent upon other people helping you out. Cassandra, you're right. Cue incoming population collapse. Exactly. Children are a blessing of the Lord, and without them, your life will not be. Yeah, it goes both ways. And one of the things that you're doing is you're actually modeling for your children the taking care of the elderly, which then they do. If you know families where people cut people off, it's only a matter of time until those people are cut off.
Mhm.
And then they're all alone.
That may be my end. I have my son with a disability here to look after me, and the other one's 10 hours away. So,
Yeah, and this is why you should have had 8 kids instead of just
my goal was 5. My goal was 5. I lost 3. I did give it a good effort.
Oh, you did a great job. You did a great job. Look, I'm not a father, so look, I'm part of the problem. Yes. So the idea, then she goes up, she weeps for her virginity. And this is another thing that's very important. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. Okay, this is phenomenal, because how is this a tradition? We see no record of it as a tradition. Okay, we have no name for it, and Israel is not particularly unified. So it's miraculous that this is kind of happening, and I think it comes back at the end of the book. Because at the end of the book, there's a bunch of virgin women.
At the end of Judges, or the end of
At the end of Judges.
Okay.
And let's just say that celebration goes badly. There's a tribe that has collapsed because there's not enough brides. Too many people have died. No one will marry their children to the Benjaminites.
Yep.
So where do they get a wife from? Well, we know that there's a group of virgins celebrating something. What are they celebrating? I think it's this, that it became a custom in Israel, and that also explains why it went out of popularity. It's just like, yeah, we used to do that every single year until all the girls got kidnapped. Then, right, you can imagine a large enough. So
this is actually very interesting if you think about it, because if God has something to do with the beginning of Jephthah's story, and you think, you know where I'm going. I mean,
that this is part of God being in control of everything. That he's already looking to solve the collapse. Is that what you're thinking?
Is it a redemption story? Yeah.
Yeah. He's working even something as terrible as this together. Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult because God is in all the details of it, without a doubt. Man, yeah. Well, and it's interesting because the Samson story is terrible too. He will do awful things, and then it will say Samson didn't know that God was orchestrating all these things.
Right.
And it's like, let me tell you, it would be great if God used our strengths to do incredible things in the world. But if we will be completely undisciplined, it's not that we don't become part of his story. It's that he uses our weaknesses instead. And we witness good happen accidentally, even as things become terrible around us.
But is it really accidentally? Or is it more like Jacob always says, God created the good, and then God created evil for the good?
I mean, I don't go in that direction. I'm more so on the side of like God is permitting evil. I see it as a negative. It's the old construction of evil is an absence.
There's the thing and there is the no thing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And because that's what he was saying, is Christians have this weird concept of evil, because in Judaism, it isn't like what Christians label as evil. It's the thing and the no thing.
Well, it's interesting because even in the language of Hebrew, a word that sometimes says evil is destruction.
Mhm.
And so, like a natural disaster, you could describe as evil, and it's not evil. It's just it's almost like chaos. It's
Right.
a hurricane isn't evil, right? Um, but we put a ton of effort in to prevent the effects of a hurricane, right? Because we don't want that destruction, that evil. So it makes sense, because if destruction falls on someone, that could be justice. Okay, you know, if someone is um, a repeated victimizer of women, and that person gets hit by a car, that is destruction on that person, but I wouldn't describe that as evil, right? But in Hebrew, those words that'd be like the same.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I come up with a lot of weird questions, and always that interesting. Um, because I know those places in life
Yeah.
where,
And this, by the way, the notion of Messiah ben Yosef, which is a very important to me. I believe this is just so people understand how I understand this, and it comes from just it's not a philosophical or I read this thing or something like that. It's I understood the concept of Messiah ben Yosef, and I've read Genesis probably more than any other book of the Bible, and then I started realizing that there was a larger pattern where the book itself has a thesis and a conclusion. And the thesis, it brings up, you have your Adam and Eve story, the fall and everything, and then immediately you have it proposing a solution. The solution to the problem of evil is the idea of the seed of the woman crushing the head of the seed of the serpent.
Mhm.
But then immediately it tells a story where there are two children, and one of those children is the seed of the woman, and the other child is the seed of the serpent. You know that language where it says sin is to Cain and Abel, sin
Yep.
is at the door. Um,
In fact,
yeah,
I just want him to check it so it's not burning because
yeah,
he's waiting for me to be done.
yeah. Sin is at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must resist it. Okay. Its desire is for you. People will note that this could be translated that sin is like a ravenous animal that wants to eat you, right? The word for desire could mean the desire to eat. It also could be it literally is the word lust, right? Now we used to say we used to make a statement like I lust for cookies, right? That doesn't mean, I think cookies are sexy. It means I want in my gut to eat a cookie. But lust, one of the strongest feelings of lust is not merely eating and drinking, it is sexual desire. So it could be translated that it's not that it's a predator that wants to consume you. It could be something seductive at the door that wants to entice you and make children with you.
Well, and we try to use different words for that in church lingo, but literally in ASL, some of the sexual words and the food words are the same.
Yeah.
You get hungry or thirsty for.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's the same there. And in New Testament, as well as Second Temple literature, Cain is described as a descendant of the serpent. That he is of the evil one. And it's this idea is that he creates a seed of the serpent. How does he create? Who is the seed of the serpent? Cain, in going to become one with this, he is the child of the union of who he used to be and his wicked desires.
Interesting.
So then Abel is killed, and Abel is the righteous one whose blood cries out, right? And this is the question that I feel is like this huge what the hell for the Cain and Abel story is wait. God has made this promise of how salvation will come. But how could it possibly be that good comes out if the good man is killed by the wicked man? How could good possibly come forward? And the resolution, so then you get reintroductions of these warring brother figures over and over again. And its final resolution is the story of Joseph and his brothers, where it's not just that one brother is against him, it's even worse. It's
Right.
One good man can save the entire world, even if the rest are wicked. Right? Where
questions I'll run past you, or maybe write you an email. This sounds like it might relate to a couple other things I was running past people. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and so Joseph he doesn't defeat his brothers in combat. He is betrayed and is righteous, and he symbolically dies. He's literally buried in the ground. He's sold for silver. He's betrayed and sold for silver by Judas of the 12. To be clear, Judas and Judah are the same name. One's Greek, one's Hebrew. So he's betrayed by Judas. According to namesake, Yasaph has been added to this conversation about Joseph.
Hey guys.
Hi. So
I wasn't gonna jump in because I was super late, but then you were talking Cain and Abel, which is probably like the one thing that always brings me into live streams. If you've never heard me talk about it on live stream before, then now you get to, David. I think here there's a huge. I think this is one of those interesting kind of different. I know earlier, Sandy, and you were talking a little bit about differences in theodicy between Jacob's view and your view, or Jewish versus your view, whatever.
Right. That Cain is redeemed. You see Cain as repenting. So I think that still can be included into what I'm saying, because I think one of the most important parts of the Joseph narrative is Judah's realization that she is more righteous than I, and that Judah puts himself in a very special position in the end of the Joseph narrative. So the end of the story is you have some brothers that like never get this clear repentance narrative. Like they aren't shown almost like clearly repenting of this terrible thing. Whereas Judah, I think it's clear that happens. And that's the resolution of the book, is that God could take even the wickedness of the other brothers and bring about good through it. That God could use.
I think by the very end, by the last chapter, it is clear that they're repentant because they actually ask for forgiveness.
Right.
So I don't think you can say that they're unrepentant or evil. Like, I think they do get to that point, and in fact, they get to that point in the Joseph story itself. That's the high drama of the Joseph story.
Right.
He's testing them to see if they really do feel bad, and it's not just Judah. Though Judah, it becomes like symbolic, like as their leader in some sense, captures that. But like they do really repent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have revealed himself.
Yes, and I think that Judah's role there is central, and
Absolutely.
that the writer, and I mean the inspirer of the text, knows that the nation will become Judah. That's part of the reason why Judah plays that role, because God knows that Judah will be the tribe that define Israel in the future.
Well, yes. Well, certainly he hopes so. Then, of course, Judah abdicates that in the book of Judges.
Well,
is
yeah. But
right.
yeah.
I mean,
So I think this could be included. Sorry, Michael.
yeah. Hi, Michael.
Michael jumped in, and I know is chomping at the bit about something because
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
You're
well,
pulling in the big names there, David.
oh, good. Yeah.
oh well, I just kind of wanted to say, I'm glad Joseph's here because he's, you know, I, it's funny. So I bought this book the other day. It's called All the Genealogies of the Bible, and this lady like basically spent like 20 years like writing down every genealogy and trying to find stuff out. And then I just before I didn't go through the whole book. I just opened up the part about Cain and his thing, and it just had this same thing of like these are to demonstrate like the evil people that all were destroyed in the flood. And I was like, what? Like that's the insight. That's what this like because that's such a common like that's
And
so many commentaries that they basically they just like want to gloss over the whole like rest of the thing because clearly Cain's the bad guy and he doesn't have any chance to regret killing his brother that was like probably his best friend for his whole life or whatever like in that moment and so that was a little disappointing. So but I know because Joseph's obviously shared similar views in showing there's a lot more to that part of the story.
Well, and why isn't Adam seen as a bad guy? I think the Cain and Abel story, his interaction with God, sounds to me like
he is bad in the Jewish tradition. He's the sin. It's not Eve who sins; it's Adam.
Right.
Well, it's Adam's sin. But I also say so. One of the great things I read recently, David, was there's a bunch of books from like my part of the Jewish world that came out on Ecclesiastes over the past couple of years. Yeah. And there's one in particular that understands the book of Ecclesiastes of Kohelet as Solomon writing about Adam's life.
Okay.
And it's fantastic. It was Hevel, right? The vanity, like the word. Everywhere in the book Kohelet is the name Abel, right? Hevel is Abel. And once you realize that, there's actually all this other stuff, but you have to know Hebrew is the problem because you don't, otherwise there's a lot of things you miss. But over and over again, the Adam and Abel get mentioned in Kohelet. And also, so does things like snakes, and so do things like curses, and so do things like justice, right? Like all this stuff in trees, like you don't notice that stuff usually unless you put on this like these glasses. But there's actually a way to read the entire book as being about Adam. And it's like Adam reflecting on his own life at the end of his life and like what happened in the sin and his own kind of process of how he understood his children and his wife and everything like that.
Yeah, and I'm okay. So this idea that I'm kind of proposing, and maybe I need to flesh it out a little bit more, is the idea that the Cain and Abel story is reiterated with a more redemptive ending is at the end of the book of Genesis.
Well, the entirety of Genesis is the brothers over and over again. They keep trying, and every time it does progress a little bit, right? That's the whole. The way that Jews read Bereshit and Shemot, right? Genesis and Exodus, is that there's a progression of brotherly tensions that get more and more redemptive until you get to the point of either. There's two different high points. There's Ephraim and Manasseh not fighting over the blessing at the end of Genesis, or Moshe and Aaron and the love they show for each other and support they have for each other.
Well, and it's specifically within Genesis, and this is very important for people to remember, and I don't know why people forget, is that Ishmael shows up to Abraham's funeral.
Oh, Ishmael's great. No, I mean, it's not that he doesn't just show up to his funeral. When Isaac doesn't get sacrificed on Har Moriah, on Mount Moriah, he goes and lives with Ishmael and Hagar after that, like to process what just happened, the trauma, whatever, to trauma bonding maybe with his brother who also got sent to the wilderness. We can have a whole discussion about the psychology here, but whatever it is, he comes from Be'er L'Chai Roi when he goes to meet Rivka, right? For the first time.
And the importance of the Jacob and Esau narrative also, like people see them as eternal enemies and
they make up.
Yeah, not embracing, kissing each other, and saying seeing your face is like seeing the face of God.
Yeah, and if you think, I mean, so this is one thing. There's a great essay on this. Maybe I've actually made I've made a couple things, I think, on my own little YouTube channel on this topic before, but that the generations after Cain, they end with a generation where all of the kids' names, the seventh generation after Cain, all those kids' names, the Lamech's kids, are named after Abel. They're all Tuval, Yuval, and Tuval Cain. Tuval Cain is actually a combination of both their names.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah.
they're all they, and what you end up seeing, that's part of the
Cain.
redemptive story, is that they actually go 7 generations until he reaches the point. And what do they do, right? All those kids, they're very kind of shepherdy, like their jobs are things like, tool making and playing music and all that stuff. But like they've moved more into this kind of exploratory creative fields of Hevel, and away from Cain's very kind of like, I just gotta work the ground, agriculture, that's my job. And there is this kind of redemptive arc of his own descendants, and even more so, and what's even like to me, why that kind of gets confirmed in some sense of why that's a redemptive arc, is that Seth's kids, his 7 generations of descendants till Noah, are all named after Cain's kids. If you look at all their names, the 7 listed names, it's Lamech and Lemech, it's Methuselah and Methuselah, right? Like they're all there's 2 Enoch.
Your Enosh versus Enoch.
Right, they're all named after each other, slightly different, but basically the same name, because Seth looks up to Cain. He's not a bad guy. Seth is actually naming, or his kids are looking up to Cain's kids, and this is why even in the Midrash, the final child we don't hear anything about really. Lamech is a daughter, and daughters don't get mentioned very often. Her name's Naamah, which means pleasantness.
Right.
And in the Midrash,
the tradition
she's
is
Noah's wife, because Noah is the combination of Seth and Cain, but the redeemed Seth and Cain.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the whole point.
And I did find this blog somewhere. This lady who I didn't read all the things because she's gone through all of Genesis, but she's like an anthropologist, and she was writing about basically how it is showing that there's a pattern of intermarriage between those 2 genealogies. I think it makes more sense if Naamah's married to Methuselah, and then they're naming her son after his father. But either way, I think that seems like the clear thing is that that's the only other the women being mentioned. Like it must be that's where the wives of the sons of Noah come from, that part of the family or whatever.
I would say that there's a connection. Noah is the only child in the line of descent that isn't named after someone from Cain's line, from Seth's side, and Naamah is the only one from Cain's side who isn't named after someone, like who doesn't have an equivalent name on the other side. So I think that's why they're paired together, and then their names actually mean something very similar. Like even though they come from different roots and they don't sound the same, they actually mean something similar. So I think that's probably why they're put together, is that Naamah and Noah are supposed to be combined.
Well, I had another question about that. So because, where it talks about like Noah is perfect in his generations, and people will say like, oh, that means his moral character was perfect. And then some people will say like, no, it's because of like genetics, like if it's like the Nephilim thing.
I've never heard that one before.
Well, that's what, so people that are in the Nephilim thing, that's what they're saying. Like,
I was just gonna say seed wars. Yeah.
Oh,
well,
no.
but then I also thought, so I think it's like, I don't know, people are like too polite to mention it, because you have like the supernatural view. I think you have that like Sethite view of Genesis 6, which is the one that you really have to reject, and then the other one's like the mighty kings or whatever. But I think if you go through that one, if we're being honest, like was there potentially like fathers taking their daughters as wives? Like obviously, like that's something that happens in history, and so that's why I think because I'm wondering, like, we also because there's just kind of a common conception that like there was the world was huge and there's billions of people.
No,
I'm not sure. It seems like
tiny.
It was probably like population collapse. I'm assuming.
Right.
So like, it's not that God killed so many people in the flood. He saved most of the people or something, or like he saved all the viable people. Like,
Well, I don't know
I mean,
about most.
that's even the thing, you know, because
That
we see
seems
now where it's like people, you know, want to live lives of sinfulness, and it results in less children being born. And that was also the only commandment really that they had.
Right.
So if like on what account is God considering the people wicked unless if they didn't obey his commandment to be fruitful and multiply?
I mean, we have a different understanding of that. So I think that's important because even though we call them Noahide laws, we understand that 6 of them are given to Adam, of the 7. So that's murder, sexual, you know, stuff, and that's rooted in a, like, especially in Babylonian Talmud thought, like in natural law theory. But we don't have to even take that on. We can just say, like, hey, what's command? It doesn't matter if it's natural law or commanded. Like, there is, like, murder is clearly a problem. There's punishment for it. So whether it was commanded not to murder, or you're supposed to know not to murder, like, it's clear that is something they're not supposed to do, right? It's not just multiply.
Well, I think So, that's an interesting one because what it says, like with Cain killing Abel, it's not like the murder where it's like it's attacked and killed, like it, you know, it's like what.
Well, you know, what's really interesting there is that if you compare the language of him, what happens, what he does, and then him building a city, it's very, very similar to the language in Deuteronomy about the cities of refuge and Numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a very nice theory. I happened to see it recently from a rabbi that he actually invents the concept of city refuge in a way, and that the city, this is very different from like Pajot's concept of kind of city and technology, evilness, Cain. Like, the city is a place for him to kind of reintegrate into society and learn how to live with people again after being a murderer. Where
he's got to know where his son is. He's
Well,
got to have some place to come back to when he's out wandering.
Just to fully represent the perspective on the city, the idea is that the city is actually a complicated thing, because the idea of Eden is that it is a walled garden, that the city is something which is
where does he get walled from? Who built the walls? Where do they come from? They're not in the text, and they're not in Jubilee, and they're not in Enoch. So where's he getting walls from?
I would say that he's getting it because that is how in artistic representations that we have of the earliest depictions of the garden.
Yeah. Honestly, where walls probably come from is Ezekiel, who thinks of the garden. He talks about Eden, and he talks about it as one of the Persian temple gardens, which is the walled garden.
Right.
But that is
Paradiso. Yeah.
Right. But that's not. I mean, to me, that's. For Ezekiel doesn't actually say it has walls, right? He doesn't make that comparison, but he does compare it enough to a Persian temple garden that I think later people, especially people who had encountered and seen real temple gardens, pagans,
in some midrashim, it is surrounded by water.
Surrounded by water, right? Well, no, it's definitely surrounded by water because it says it has 4 rivers. That's not the problem. Walls and rivers are very different things symbolically. Right. Yeah. It's not a city, I think there's also different types of cities. Jerusalem is a city. Jerusalem, though, is not a city of refuge. And I think there's and that's not a city in the way of a behemoth city that that Pajot often talks about, like the evil technology city.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, my thought is, like, you know, looking at it, and it's like, what is God trying to accomplish here? So you know, because clearly, you know, by the time you get after the flood, and there's an explicit commandment not to murder, and you know, but you know, he marks Cain, so Cain's protected, but he can't farm for himself. You know, he has to build a city, so he doesn't build it for himself; he builds it for his son. You know, because he has to have some place. You know, because even though he's a wanderer, his son doesn't have to be untethered. But you know, so he's got this mark, and so it's like, what is the rest of his life doing? He's going around, he's relying on handouts, you know, from others. And why can't you work? Well, here's why. And why do you have that mark on your head or wherever? You know, well, let me tell you a story. And so it's like, in a sense, you know, I'm thinking he spends the rest of his life telling everybody that murder is bad, that he made a mistake. That
I have that image of when someone is like a sex offender, and when they have to go door to door and tell
Yeah.
Right.
that
But I think
idea of like,
here's the difference, because I think this is a little more redemptive than that, right, David? Because here he becomes more Abel-like, because Abel is a wandering shepherd, and his brother gets redeemed by taking on wandering in a way. I think that changes the dynamic of that. The justice is a form, right? He was fighting against this lifestyle. He really was. I mean, I think that was part of their fight for sure, right? He wants to be. Well, this gets into way more than I probably want to get into.
Well, you know what?
I think,
But it,
yeah.
it makes
I-
me wonder, because is that like why halakha? Like you've got a way, you've got a direction,
yeah.
you've got movement. It is
Somewhat.
the beginning of.
I think there's a really I didn't like finish it, but I have a lot of notes written down. I started writing a thing. There's a lot of parables between Cain and Abel, and then I think you could say with Paul and Stephen, and that Paul's participation in the death of Stephen, then becomes like this impetus for some of the order is changed around a little bit, but
no, I think that's good.
But essentially, it's like, what does he do? He goes around and he's always telling people, I'm the chief of sinners. I was a murderer. And then he's sharing this message. And because somebody did a good one about basically talking about how like a lot of Paul's messages in the later parts of Acts really reflect like Stephen's sermon. Like,
yeah, that's a very well, and whenever I read a story, I'm like, who wrote this down? And so within that story, it's just like, well, we know one person who would write this story, the story of Stephen down. Yeah, but going back to the text as we were talking about it, especially because we're about to get into Samson, not today, but very soon in the future. It's if you like, I don't think that I'll make it slightly personal for myself. There's this situation where I go through something and I'm trying to figure out which direction I go in, what I'm supposed to do. And I'm praying and I'm asking God, like, which direction is the one where you'll be working through? And God made it kind of clear to me that, like, if you choose this, then I'm going to reveal myself this way. If you choose that, I will reveal myself that way. There's no option where God isn't involved, is not revealing himself. I don't get to, like, if I want to be, even the people in my life who have been disobedient and sought to satiate their desires in the most base ways possible. Like, I had a very, very close friend who I loved so deeply. And he made an incredible bad mistake sexually in his life. And I watched it happen. And I received wisdom from his terrible mistake. There is no, like, it is not that God did not use that for anything.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's really certainly think it's like, because you think about like, why did God why does God let these bad things happen or whatever? And it's like Abel, I see Abel as not fighting back, and so like that's why God chose him or whatever, or preferred him. But it's like, okay, so you use the death of one person to teach the whole world like a very salient, more so than just because what happens with a command, God gives an explicit command, people want to disobey it.
Michael, if you take it and then you say that the ultimate revelation of what that is in the end of Genesis, then it's not just that he teaches the world. Joseph saves the world.
Yeah.
Without Joseph, the Gentiles don't survive the famine.
Yeah.
He doesn't just save his family. He doesn't just save Israel. He becomes a blessing to all the nations, where it's like the righteous. Yeah, the righteous.
I mean, he also kind of destroys Egypt, and there's a very
beginning of Passover. When you're dipping the parsley in the salt water, it symbolizes the beginning of Passover is to remember Joseph. his coat being dipped in the blood, because the beginning of that is the downfall of Pharaoh.
Oh, I meant he destroys Egypt even before it, right? Like he basically takes away all their lands. They lose all their money. He moves them around in different cities. Like he imposed. In fact, there's a reading that is that the laws of the sabbatical year are exactly the opposite of what Joseph did to the Egyptians, because we learned from the bad thing that Joseph did.
Okay, yeah.
So like, so I wasn't even saying about the destruction of Egypt like Moses, like, which I see as generally a good thing, but even the bad destruction of Egypt, which leads to the good destruction of Egypt, which is about Joseph.
Yosef, while we have you here, because of what we were talking about, could you give your perspective on Jephthah's sacrifice of his daughter? Do you understand it as a sacrifice?
Yeah.
Do you understand it inspired by Hashem?
What do you mean inspired by Hashem?
So within this section, this is what we were talking about.
I know the section. What do you mean by inspired by Hashem? That's the part that's that phrase.
So it seems it's a possible line of interpretation. I am not taking this interpretation, that within this section, that is he making a vow that he shouldn't make?
Yes.
Okay.
He's making a vow that he should not be making. Okay. He is. I gave a whole sermon on this earlier this year. I could send you a copy. In
Sparks notes.
Yeah.
Right now.
It's not long, but
yeah, you're not Presbyterian. You're not going on. Yeah.
No. We're short. Yeah, no. I mean, our sermons are not very long.
No, I know.
But in many ways, Jephthah and Gideon are inverses from each other, right? They have a lot of the same story. They have the battle of the fords of the river. They have issues with, like, Gideon, who doesn't want to speak, ends up being a great speaker, and Jephthah, who literally his name means like to open, like to open a mouth, like messes up in speech. Like that's his Achilles heel. And there's all these weird contrasts and parallels to like go through the stories together. I think it's really, really useful. So I think he's trapped by a vow that he shouldn't make, and he basically makes that vow into an idol, is one way to describe it.
Yeah, for those who don't know, one of the central parts of Yom Kippur is actually renouncing.
It's not a central part. It's just the most popular part. Most rabbis actually oppose the practice.
Do they? Okay.
Like Kol Nidre is a hugely problematic thing. But yes, you're not supposed to take vows. That's what Ecclesiastes says. Don't take vows.
Right.
Vows are bad. And Jephthah is a great example of someone who should not be vowing, takes a vow, and then doesn't do. I mean, from like a halachic perspective, there are ways to undo vows, because vows create worlds, and they create commitments, and they create things that sometimes should not be created because you don't understand the power of your own speech. And there's the most famous midrash on this is that Jephthah should have gone to Pinchas, who's the high priest, and had his vow annulled, because you need to go to this, someone like whatever. This gets into the sermon of how this gets done, but like he could have had his vow annulled. He's for various reasons, he's too proud. He doesn't want to. He feels like he's trapped, or it becomes this sort of idol to him. He will not get rid of the vow. He will not go to Pinchas. And Pinchas is actually also blamed in the Midrash, because he could have gone to Jephthah and he could have annulled the vow. Like he didn't have to wait for the guy to come to him. He could have done something proactively, and he failed to do so. This gets into the whole story about why high priests are connected to cities of refuge, right? Because they are responsible for everyone, the morality of the land as a whole.
And that is part of that role is distinguishing if the death penalty, if the taking of life is a good thing, because if you intentionally kill someone, there's no city of refuge for you. I'm sure that system would have been abused in such a way. an
Well,
actual
we know it
murderer.
was. People went and they clung to the
Yes.
horns of the altar, and the high
Right,
priest
right.
would be the one to decide. You can't cling to the horns of the altar because this is not a refuge. You kill someone on
Right.
purpose. But people would try. It's all
Right.
tied together. So this gets to the city of refuge in Cain too. Everything's tied together, right? So here, in the midrash, right, he should have gone. They could have annulled the vow. Both of them are too stubborn or proud or whatever it is, and they don't. And she dies. I would take the literal meaning of the text. I mean, I know it's euphemism, and you had that discussion. I heard that part of your. That's when I got on the stream.
Yosef
Yeah.
right now, just to not Yosef, sorry, Hezi in the chat is saying just joining now, but it's not clear what happens to her.
It is not clear. It is not clear what happens. I think that it's likely that she actually did die, but I do understand there's a midrash that he locks her up somewhere for the rest of her life, whatever.
And
Well,
do you
know,
think?
So I
Yeah,
remember because I remember I'd read an article not too long about this, and basically showing how I don't remember which word it is, but that can have that ambiguous
It
meaning
is.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me like the preference, like especially in English translation for like he killed her, was kind of similar to that just Cain and Abel thing of like, well, good people and bad people, and so it makes it easy to,
Except Jephthah's a good person. I think even in the New Testament, right? He's held up as a good person.
Yeah, as one of the people of faith. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. So I think none of the judges are perfect. In the second half of Judges, they get worse, right? After Gideon, all the judges get worse and worse. So we're at the beginning of getting worse.
Well, and even we didn't get there, but there's going to be a judge, and a previous judge had 70 people on donkeys.
Yes.
And the next reference to children on donkeys is 30 people on donkeys.
Yeah,
so you can even see them corroding, that there's a corrosion of the judges. And as we were kind of talking before, you were saying the comparison between Jephthah and Gideon. Gideon is the child of a concubine. Jephthah is the child of a prostitute. When you're talking to modern people, you're trying to explain what the differences in different kinds of marriages are, but there's both of them have certain levels of illegitimacy, but there's a greater amount of illegitimacy. Is it Abimelech? Abimelech is the child of a concubine, or is it Gideon?
Abimelech is.
Abimelech is.
But also, I was super annoyed by your translation on in your previous video on Judges 10. You guys kind of skipped over it because in the translation doesn't point out the problem. So the guy after Abimelech, the guy after Abimelech is Tola. Tola, in your translation, it said like son of Pua, son of Dodo from Yisachar, but Ben Dodo means his cousin, or the son of his uncle, literally. Tola is Avimelech's first cousin, which continues this whole dynastic problem that I think you guys totally skipped over. It kind of annoyed me last time.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, and this we were talking about this before too. Is I don't know if we actually got to it. Is the beginning of the book begins with such an illicit marriage as well?
Yes.
Where Caleb's brother Othniel marries his niece, which is not an allowed marriage as well. It's not a good time.
Sorry, marrying it is actually an allowed marriage according to Leviticus. You have to be careful. That one's a tricky one because that is technically allowed. Whether it should be allowed is a separate question.
Okay. Just to honor Hezi in the chat, it says she knew no man. Why was this needed if she is dead? And those who cry for her / weep for her virginity, not her death.
I'm aware of that
Yes,
reading. It's true.
I think it's very important where I think there's certain texts where we're supposed to debate them, and And just to be completely clear, I think it's trying to be a story of brutality. And if she is just remaining a virgin, it doesn't sound as brutal as leaving the possibility open of her being killed. I think that the text could be more explicit and does not want to be. And in not wanting to be so explicit, it is like a jagged cut, which we notice more than a clean cut. Like like when
yeah, I mean that's as common. I mean, this is certainly common in Jewish exegesis, is that the text is purposely ambiguous so that you do engage with it.
So that we talk about it.
Yeah, I
will say.
Well, like, what does he do? Because, like, or I mean, I guess how biblically knowledgeable was everybody of the previous things? But I mean, like, you have one other story. You have like one like really relevant story, which is like the story of Abraham, sacrificing Isaac, where God really intervenes. And so is he just going to assume like, well, that was Abraham? But
let me tell you, knowing people who grew up, because I grew up Catholic, knowing people that had to do things for church and et cetera, or even knowing secular Jews. Like I had a friend and he was quote unquote Jewish. He had a Hebrew Bible at home. And one of his friends said, "Oh, do you know any of the stories of Abraham?" And he said, "I know of them." Like he knows that there are stories about Abraham, but couldn't give you the slightest detail of any of those things. And again, he's a character who is surrounded by terrible people. That's part of his characteristic. He surrounds himself with worthless men.
I'll say that there's also this other thing, which isn't just like how well do they know other Bible stories, but like the book of Judges specifically uses the same phrase of maiden women who have not known a man. Like it uses those phrases again in Judges 21. This gets into the whole like chiasmatic structure of the book and all that stuff, but it's going to use that again for the women who are going to come from Yavesh Gilad and become the wives of the Benjamites.
And that's what I was saying, is that at the end, that mention, people just go they just bypass it and they forget, okay, what is this thing at the end? But I think there's a connection.
But I'll say that this phrase only appears 3 times in the whole of Tanakh. The other place it appears is not in Judges, like that she did not know a man. That other time it appears is with Rivka.
Okay.
Pretty sure. Is it Rachel? Rivka. It's when it says just Genesis 24:16, right? The maiden was very beautiful, Betula, a virgin, v'ish lo yada, and a man had not known her. So there's these other biblical connections and references that the author of the book of Judges seems to be very deliberately making in interesting ways that I think make it more ambiguous as opposed to less. Because like what you're going to say, what does Rivka have to do with this story?
Yeah. No,
maybe it's random. Maybe it's just a turn of phrase, but in some ways it seems like, oh, that's the only other place it's a reference.
But the Rivka story is all about her helping perpetuate the line. And so the perpetuating the children is an important part.
Connected to end of Judges, I think much more clearly than it is connected to Jephthah's daughter. To Chazi's point, like I hear that reading, I think it's complicated because it clearly, I think the order of how that, right? It's very weird, right? They do cry over her maidenhood. That's just for the 2 months, and then she's killed, or 2 months, and then she's killed, and then it says he fulfills his vow. They don't talk about them crying for her afterward with respect to her maidenhood. They talk about
is it
no
changing.
And I wondered why 4 days.
And why 4 days? Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, and I'm wondering, is it literally 2 moons, like in reference to her menstrual cycle? Is that possible?
I mean, it's the standard word for months. So it's a little bit.
That would be an interesting thing, because that would be like, you could take that as like proof of virginity or something.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I had a
oh yeah,
I had a question.
Or at least proof of not being pregnant, I guess you should say.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, Sandy, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Why,
because you keep talking about how they say things and don't say things. but I was gonna say she spit like I was gonna. Dang it! Sorry, guys. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask this. So when she says to him, and he says, "I have opened my mouth to the Lord. I cannot take back my vow," and she says, "You have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do unto me according to what has come out of your mouth." All that's come out of his mouth is death. And usually, when you think of a young maiden, you're thinking of no man has known her, means nobody has opened her womb. And I'm thinking, is there something in terms of the specific phrase? Because there's a billion ways he could say, "Hey, I made a vow to God," and it was no. They both repeat it. Is that intentional? Is there something about that that is why they're talking about it? Besides just she dies. I mean, she dies. I think she does.
And it sounds like, Yosef, you were saying that would be the opening of the mouth is about what his name is. That's what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, because I'm still thinking sign language and
No. I think sign language helps think in pictures, which we need to do more.
I get told that in poetry in my writing group.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like, it just screams that to me. This is not just about what did he say. Yeah.
Michael, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to some of the conversations that were had, because I wanted to give Yosef his interpretation on it, which is very much appreciated. And I just wanted to know if you had anything to add to it. Hezi is continuing to disagree with everything you say in a good way, which is I will say is, I think, the purpose of it being ambiguous. But now I'm going to move it over to Michael.
Well, I thought so. The first time when I read about that, there is, because I think, pretty much across all the English Bibles, it seems like they make it much more explicit that, he kills her or whatever. But, when I first saw, like, there's this ambiguity, I think and obviously, Jacob would just say, yeah, that's because the translations are terrible and you have to do and all that. But, I think it is good to know that there are some of these ambiguities because, like, for instance, like that guy that Paul was talking to and stuff, or like just so many of these people where, like, the question of, like, God is a moral monster. Obviously, God is a moral monster, and they want to condemn, the Bible for all this stuff, and which so much of it is just telling you what happened. It's not saying God did this or whatever. God certainly doesn't seem to be making him do anything. And he shouldn't. The thing that he shouldn't have made the vow in the first place. It's like, or what? What if he could say, like, no, God, don't. Instead, like, let the punishment come on me instead, or something. Like, there's options he could have done, but I think that just knowing that there is that ambiguity is helpful for that. And I think that it's really interesting, similar to the Cain and Abel story, like what we see, how we read it and interpret it, kind of reveals stuff about us that maybe is interesting, or we should be thinking about, like.
I think I want to share this because I've had it on my mind, and I want people to have this in their minds because I don't see it being expressed when there's conversations about the problem of evil, which is that there is no formal contradiction between, and people will emphasize this, there's no formal contradiction between God's existence and the existence of evil. There is no formal contradiction, and no one has ever shown there to be one. It is not a intellectual argument. It is an emotional argument, and they leave it there. And I think that there is a last moment of that needs a last step that needs to be made in that conversation. People need to be called on the fact that you find this a compelling argument when it is not an argument. You stating this as a reason shows that you are not engaging in this topic through reason.
Yeah.
And they leave that last bit because it's too much of an attack. Look, Bill Maher, I'll use this as an example. Bill Maher uses mythicist arguments against the New Testament. Those are such bad arguments that what it actually shows is that you've done no research. And people debate him on the points of mythicism without actually saying, wait, that you find this a compelling argument needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
When people are turning against God because of these things, this needs to be part of the conversation, not just the argument, but what arguments you're finding compelling is actually revealing so much more than the arguments themselves.
Yeah. I think too, because I think that one of the things is that it stands on is that people are always putting this notion in that it's unjust because the people are suffering, but they are not really asking the question if God's suffering. Like, and I think whether because so much of the stuff is God's children hurting other ones of God's children. Like,
yeah. What do you do?
Yeah. So even if you don't have, I think it's a much clearer argument to make if you go to Jesus and the incarnation and the cross and all that. That God's the one who's ultimately suffering the most, and he's not putting us through anything in that circumstance. He's not putting us through anything that he's not also willing to do and go above and beyond. But even without that, I mean, it's like it's just this thing of like, I guess it's just because people, like you're saying, people are making these arguments not actually trying to wrestle with the problem seriously. They're doing it from first premise, belief in God is absurd and obviously it doesn't exist. Second premise, let me poke holes in your religious book. Like,
right.
So yeah, it's not a serious intellectual pursuit.
Yeah. Joseph also, Joseph, I'm sorry. It's the reason is not just that you're both Jewish. The reason is it's the Y in the young Levite and that it's not Hezi's name. I'm like, they both have the letter Y. This is how dyslexia works, my friends. I grew up very dyslexic, and what would happen is if I read a word and I wasn't paying enough attention, I would just pick a letter and then make up the rest of the word. So Hezi is saying, no, I'm just playing.
Yeah.
And, I'm really, really happy with the way that we are playing right now, guys. I think this is I am having a lot of fun on this interaction. So thank you all for coming in. I need to say things that are more triggering to more people so that we have better conversations.
I mean, it's not like there aren't real conversations, philosophically deep conversations about theodicy that exist. Right?
No, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's tons of great work on theodicy.
Yeah. And I absolutely, I agree. You see what I'm getting at, though. People who use it as an argument against trying to understand God's goodness is very, very important.
Yes.
Dismissing God through these arguments it's like I had a conversation, it was either yesterday or 2 days ago on this channel about tangible details. Tangible details, for those who weren't listening, I got this idea from a film critic called Film Crit Hulk, where he is a film critic but talks as though he's the Incredible Hulk. So all of his blogs are in all caps and Hulk speak. So it'll be Hulk think that the protagonist not very clear. Anyway, I used to really like him a lot. I don't know if I stand behind it anymore, but he talked about tangible details where if you are criticizing a movie and you don't understand what you don't like about it, you'll just grab anything, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I don't like that musician. Why? I don't like that musician because she's an industry plant, right? And it's just like, or her parents were rich or whatever. It's like, that's not actually why you don't like their music. That's just something you were able to grab onto. So the biggest one is with comic book movies, people will say, well, it wasn't, that movie was bad. Why was that bad? Oh, because it was different than the source material. No, you can change the source material and still have an amazing book. Or an amazing movie. It's just they did both those things and you're able to grab on to that. So a lot of the arguments against God are just tangible details. They're not real arguments. You're just grabbing at things. Whether or not
I don't know if I like that, actually. Because I mean, if we really understand, and I don't know how much I don't really know how much you participate in like different parts of this little corner, David.
Yeah.
But like from things, but whether I think it's from any of the perspectives, this kind of works. I don't know which language to use, but like perspective, not just perspective, but like the lenses you use do sort of matter, and they're part of, you know, you make a choice to use a certain lens to analyze something or look at something or even experience something, and you have sometimes no choice. It's an unconscious choice to experience something. So like if, you know, if my lens is, you know, I'm someone who really loved the book, and that's shaping my lens, and that's what I was expecting in my mental model of what the movie should be like that is what I'm comparing it against, that is my metric, then it's not just a tangible thing that I'm grabbing onto like post hoc. Like that is what I was looking for, and that's what I didn't get.
Well, so the reason why I'm using that as an example, specifically that difference, is because like a lot of superhero people, the standard movie as how good comic book movies could be was with Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker in the second of the Nolan Batman movies. And that version of the Joker is very compelling and existed nowhere in comic books. It is not a reference to any.
And that's I don't think there's a problem with that. You can definitely have a good movie. It's just that it depends what you're going in for and expecting, or whatever you pick as your metric matters. I don't think it's just a tangible detail. Like I think tangible is like something beyond that matters here.
But you didn't have all these people rising up saying this movie was terrible because it didn't follow the source material.
Correct.
They only say this was terrible because it didn't follow the source material when there's some other reason that made it terrible.
Sometimes,
yeah,
I don't know. I think about Lord of the Rings, and there were people. I mean, it was a good movie. Most fans liked it, but it didn't mean they weren't annoyed that Tom Bombadil wasn't there. Right? Like there were still certain, I would say, valid critiques if they were expecting that as a core part of the movie. They would have been
more annoyed at the version of Tom Bombadil that would have been there.
They would have been.
Sure. I was upset that The Lord of the Rings wasn't a musical, because when I read those books, I was like, man, this is actually a musical where it's just like, and now a song about.
You know, I think what you're saying is, you know, I think that, you know, like I say, I think, you know, that if there are those tangible details that that are easy to grab and they're cheap and they're up for grabs, you know, that is a thing where people will latch onto it and then they never stop. They never continue thinking about what's really bothering them about it or whatever.
Right.
So, you know, I think there is definitely some value to that, like, way of looking at things, you know, because I more or less, like, you know, I mean, because I've had, like, you know, Lord of the Rings is one example, and some other books and series and things like that, where it's like when people were trying to say like George Martin, you know, Game of Thrones or whatever, like, oh, these books are like so amazing, and
they're not.
No, they're not.
They're awful. Like, actually. Can we bond over that for a second?
It's total failure because you're never going to finish the book series, which means, as far as I'm concerned, if you can't end a series, you failed. You know?
So Michael, I don't know if you've heard me talk about this before. I think that it's so important that people know about that series of books because it's the perfect example of the fact that we all know it's bullshit to say it's about the journey, not the destination. Because I don't care how good any one of those seasons are. there is no ending, it is terrible. It's a piece of crap.
Interesting. I mean, I never watched it. I started the first book. It was one of the few books that I put down in the middle because I just disliked it enough that it wasn't worth finishing. I eventually did finish the first book years later, but that was it. I couldn't read. I was like, I'm not reading the rest of the series. Like, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's because I have some beefs with Tolkien too, because I think
Sure.
people kind of like idolize him a little too much. But like I think the problem with George Martin is it's like, you know, there's a like the thing of like subverting the expected tropes or whatever, like that works to a certain extent, but only so far. And then he tried to subvert everything the whole time, and
There's in fact there's a trope of over undermining tropes. Like there's a fun analysis of that somewhere, that brings us in.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like, there's certain things that if you watch them all the way through, it's just like, yeah, but this is like music that is anti-music. It's like you can listen to it once as like an experiment, but you can't actually enjoy that the third time through. Which is also why a lot of people that are into these like art movements are also into drugs. That's how you enjoy such things. You enjoy such things that are anti-stories, anti-movements, by being incapacitated. My friends, I have to end this stream because I have other things I must be doing. But it was a wonderful conversation. Joseph, Michael, a special thanks to you. Sandy, you get thanks, but you get thanked every week because you're always here. Always doing such a good job of attending.
I'm sure there must be some regularity to these things. It's just I
do 1 p.m. on Thursdays. 1 p.m. every Thursday is when we're starting. So next week we will be getting to the end of the Jephthah story because there's a conflict with Ephraim, which I know Joseph is going to have thoughts on that because you talk a lot about Ephraim. And we may be able to get into the introduction of the character of Samson.
So wait, what time is it there now where you are?
Right now it is 3 p.m.
Okay, so 12 o'clock my time is when it starts then.
Okay, all right.
Central?
You're West Coast.
Where are you, Michael?
Texas Central Time.
Central.
So are you like right south of right south of Chicago and kind of straight down the middle there?
Yeah.
Joseph, where are you? I can't remember where you are.
I'm outside of DC.
You're outside of BC? You're
DC.
Canadian?
No, DC.
Oh, DC. Okay.
The other time.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for everyone attending and having conversations.
See you guys.
I think, this is regenerating the world.
Thank you for hosting.
Okay. Sandy, can you stick around for 2 seconds?
Yep.
Okay. Ending the stream. Okay. Michael, thank you. Sandy, have you tried to practice Messianic Christianity?
Nope.
Okay.
I've had books on it, like I've got some books on it for a while ago.
Okay.
I haven't tried to blend anything.
Yeah, you're just interested.
Tried. I'm kind of in that spot where through the entire time I was in the Calvinist camp, my brain has been going to these places and asking questions that they could not answer.
Oh, hey, I'm still streaming apparently. Thank you for having these conversations. Okay, all right. Cassandra. Thank you so much.